In a somewhat predictable move, the FTC has moved to block the Activision acquisition by Microsoft. And so that's something that I want to cover in this video. So guys, as you smash that like button, let me run the intro. What's up guys, and welcome back to the channel. And just full disclosure before we start, just note that I do have a position in Activision in this sort of like workout type situation. I wouldn't consider this an arbitrage. It's more like a workout. You know, does the acquisition work out? If it does, we make some money. If it doesn't, we don't make some money. And I'm not the only one who has a position in this workout type of opportunity. Warren Buffett is another name. And I was very interested and excited when I found out that he did enter into this, and I actually made a video when he did, because I had previously purchased this before knowing that Berkshire Hathaway would get involved in it as well. But essentially what it tells me is that, you know, I don't really consider myself a super mind as it relates to investments. And so whenever I do see like a super investor, someone who's a lot smarter than I am, take the same position, it makes me feel like, you know, I'm moving in the right direction in terms of my overall development as it relates to finance and investing. But alas, I say all of that because I just want you guys to know that I'm incredibly biased when it comes to this transaction, because I'm hoping that this transaction works out. So just keep that in mind as we move into this. Now you can see, as announced by the Wall Street Journal just earlier today, the antitrust enforcer FTC actually seeks to stop the deal, saying that it will harm competition. And what exactly do they mean by that? Well, let's get into the article and see exactly what they're finding an issue with. And so you can see here midway into the article that in its complaint, the FTC said that Microsoft previously suppressed competition from rivals through its 2021 acquisition of ZeniMax Media Inc. And so the agency said Microsoft made several of Bethesda's games, including Starfield and Redfall, exclusive to its own platforms, despite giving assurances to European antitrust authorities that it would do otherwise. And so effectively what this does, and you know, this is sort of like what I thought about when I entered into this transaction, is what would happen if the FTC did push back on it. We did mention Nina Khan's name earlier. I mean, I would probably say I mentioned it in May because she'd probably go after them. And so really all this does is it sets the stage for a court challenge over the deal. And I personally believe that Microsoft will win, but once again, huge bias. And so the FTC goes on to say that Microsoft would both have the means and motive to harm competition by changing pricing for Activision's games, degrading the quality of games on rival consoles and gaming services, or withholding content from rivals entirely. Now, Microsoft originally gaffed, and I'll link the video in this video afterwards, where they said that they were only going to make it available for around 10 years. However, the European commissioners or the European regulations people did push back on that. And it sounds to me like Microsoft, based on what we've been hearing, have taken a step back. And I do believe that in order to get this deal done, they will make those, at least Call of Duty, available perpetually. And part of the reason why they would want to make it perpetually anyways is because Microsoft has come out and said that this deal is for mobile. It's not necessarily for these console type games. And I agree with them. And so now's the time to put your money where your mouth is and actually go in on that. And so you would just make Call of Duty available perpetually anyways, but we'll see if they actually end up doing. I suspect that they will. And so that's one of the reasons why I don't believe that the FTC will win in a lawsuit, but I have other reasons why I feel that way. Now, first, I want to show you exactly what the Microsoft execs said to this decision. So you can see here, Brad Smith, Microsoft's vice president and chair, said, "While we believed in giving peace a chance, we have complete confidence in our case and welcome the opportunity to present our case in court." So in other words, they're saying, hey, FTC, F around and find out. Now note guys, just here in the middle here, this is what I was discussing earlier in this video. Microsoft's deal for Activision is also under investigation by antitrust regulators in the UK and EU. And like I've said previously in this video, that in order for them to, I believe, and I'm speculating here, in order for them to get the acquisition across the finish line with those two regulators, they're going to have to make Call of Duty available into perpetuity. And note here, guys, this is kind of the reason why I sort of purchased this workaround anyways. Antitrust experts initially did expect the deal to clear government scrutiny, and I actually was one of the people that did take that perspective. I just felt like it's not enough consolidation in the video games industry for it to impact pricing. And that's kind of the way I think about sort of like market monopolistic practices, because that's largely what these regulatory bodies are set up for. And, you know, this article will go on and explain that, but I just didn't think that Microsoft would have the leverage to increase the prices overall for the industry as a whole. I just don't think any sort of publisher has that. And this industry is so wide open that anyone can come in and just become a powerhouse. Like, for example, the publishers of Horizon Zero Dawn or The Last of Us, and then the money that these publishing houses make doesn't necessarily just stop with video games, because, for example, The Last of Us came out in like 2013. In 2023, 10 years later, they now have an HBO show. So they're moving towards Hollywood now, just to give an example of how many different ways these publishers can make money. So I just don't think that sort of like a monopolistic practices suit works here. But the question is, we know what Microsoft thinks. We know what the regulators think. You know what I never actually did? I never actually stopped to ask, what does Activision think of all of this? Do they still believe that they should be acquired? And do they think that it's still fair to the industry? I think we should hear what Activision has to say. So you can see here, Activision's CEO actually put out a press release today, and they're saying that this whole situation of the FTC going after the deal sounds alarming. So the CEO wanted to say that, I want to reinforce my confidence that this deal will close. The allegation that this deal is anti-competitive does not align with the facts, and we believe we'll win this challenge. And so we believe these arguments will win despite a regulatory environment focused on ideology and misconceptions about the tech industry. And so as soon as I read that, I was just like, shots fired. That's crazy that he went at it that hard. And so, look, he's fully confident in it. I'm confident as well, but I've only allocated a very small percentage of my portfolio to this deal because initially when I saw it, even after Warren Buffett sort of made a purchase into it, I never thought that like it's 100% foolproof. And if you've ever read a Joel Greenblatt book, you'll note that he's not super hot on these types of workout transactions because in his experience, they generally don't give you the results that you're working for. At least they're not as predictable as you think they would be. And so because of that, throughout my whole investment life, I've never really gone like all in. Really, I've never really gone all in on anything. This is another one of those. However, despite that, I still believe, I would say around 95, maybe 90% that this deal will go through. I'm just very confident in it, but of course, I could absolutely be wrong. And so that's why I always encourage portfolio diversification. Look, I'm a huge bull on Alibaba, but I don't think my portfolio has ever gone higher than 10% on that name either. And it's funny how the things that you're least confident on actually run. Like, for example, I didn't think H&R Block would run 70% this year. I actually thought that that name was going to go down to $20 so I could pick it up. But of course, it ran up 70% this year, and I never ended up getting to buy that particular security. Congratulations to all of you guys, though, on the Patreon who did buy it. I hate that you guys remind me about it every day, you beautiful trolls. And so let's see how the market reacted to this. Well, you can see that the market is just kind of like, the people who are in it are already in it. The people who are not in it are not in it. The market didn't really move. The stock went down, 1.5%, but, no real movement on the news. And so it looks like no real change to the overall sentiment of the security. Note, however, that this transaction is being done at $95 per share. So there's a huge spread here, which tells you that the market believes there's a more than little likelihood that this transaction won't be done. However, this $74 per share price, I think, is just like a weird place to be because it's either going to be done at 95, or at least in my opinion, the shares go well under $60. And I'll show you my valuation on Activision at the end of this video. Now, let's get into the meat of this article and see exactly what the FTC has to say about this, because I'm looking for a reason for the FTC to convince me that this transaction should not go through. And if they do convince me that this transaction won't go through, I'm not in a huge loss position right now because the stock really hasn't moved since I made my transaction, so I could just close my options position if I really wanted to. So here's what they're saying. The combined company would have controlled about 11% of the global digital game publication business, according to the Bloomberg Intelligent Analyst. And so that tells me that I don't think the FTC has a leg to stand on. And the reason why is because antitrust law historically has focused on whether mergers that combine competitors resulting in greater market concentration would likely drive up prices for consumers. This is the big part right here. And so I think the law is the law, and the judge will have to pass a decision based on the current competition law and not what the FTC leaders want it to be. However, Ms. Khan Nina Khan, who heads the FTC division, and other so-called progressive antitrust enforcers say that competition law hasn't kept up with the evolution of the digital economy. And so under the current Biden administration, appointees such as Ms. Khan have pushed for focusing less on price effects and also on examining more vertical mergers in which companies acquire key suppliers or partners and integrate those firms into their operations. And so one of the issues that's scaring the market right now, and I talked about this when I first talked about the Activision deal, is that Ms. Khan's agency this year has challenged Meta, the owner of Facebook, deal for a virtual reality exercise game developer. And recall, guys, if you're not aware, Meta is not really in the gaming space. Primarily, their revenues come from the ad business. And so although they're moving into the AR and VR space, this is sort of like an example of what they're going after at the FTC right now. And of course, you know, the FTC is not the only ones that are like not interested in this deal going through. Sony, and I've discussed this before, has been the loudest of the critics of the planned Activision deal, arguing that it could hurt competition if Microsoft restricts access to Activision games, especially Call of Duty. Now, I've talked about this ad nauseum due to the franchise's exceptional popularity. But here's the problem. Popularity is not a monopoly. If they raise prices on Call of Duty games, someone can just come in and build the same thing and sell it for a lot less. And so the market would correct itself. Also, if PlayStation wants to talk about having popular games exclusive, just look at PlayStation's exclusive franchise names. For example, the Horizon Zero Dawn series and the Uncharted series. And I think Horizon Zero Dawn is now available on computer or PC, but it'll never be available on Xbox. And it's one of the reasons why I bought a PS5 as opposed to an Xbox. And so they don't have a leg to stand on when it comes to exclusive titles, because if they're saying that Xbox is going to act monopolistically, well then what about all the titles that they have in-house that they're not willing to share with Xbox? Are they acting monopolistically with those titles? I don't even know if that makes sense. I'm not a lawyer, but it just seems, just from a logical perspective, that their argument doesn't make sense. You guys let me know if I'm completely off base. A lot of the times I could be. And so you guys let me know if I'm thinking about this correctly or if this deal actually won't go through as a result of something that I'm just overall missing. And of course, to that Sony comment, you know, as I said previously on the channel, that 10-year comment may have been the death nail in the eyes of the European regulators. And in my opinion, and I'm just speculating here, and it's really fun to speculate though, the commitment has to be indefinite to pass European regulatory scrutiny, even though it doesn't really make business sense. I know, and I know a lot of you guys are going to say that Microsoft, it wouldn't make sense for them to allow access to these titles by the competitors indefinitely or into perpetuity. I just don't think these regulators are going to go for it unless they do. I know it doesn't make sense, but sometimes you have to do things that don't make sense to just get larger objectives across the finish line. And so Microsoft did say that it doesn't plan to deny Sony and others access to Activision games. And so the company has pledged to give Sony and Nintendo access to new Call of Duty games on their respective current hardware the same day they launch on Xbox consoles for the next 10 years. However, this article doesn't actually have the most up-to-date information. So I'll just add to it. Microsoft actually started walking back on this 10-year comment. And so I hope they do update the article for that. Now, the FTC's complaint, however, points out that Activision's library of games includes more hits than this Call of Duty, and that consoles may not play as big of a role in future video gaming as they do today. So effectively, the FTC is saying this might become a monopolistic item in the future, even though it's not a monopolistic item today. It doesn't hold water with me. I think this transaction goes through. And progressive groups have put pressure on the FTC to block the deal, saying it would create industry stovepipes, I don't know what that means, in which technology companies own lucrative content and user data and have the ability to make money from advertising as well. So in other words, progressive groups are mad because Microsoft can make money and make money with different sort of like ways of making money. So finding different sort of revenue streams. I think this is weak. I'm waiting for a strong argument against this deal. So far, I have not been presented with a strong argument against this deal from the regulators. But look, I try to be as sort of like even-handed as possible. And, you know, you guys know from my comments that I make on Alibaba and just operating in China, oftentimes I do criticize things that are happening in China because I try to be as sort of like even as possible and not take a side. I'm not like a cheerleader for anything. I just don't see anything that the regulators can sit on to block this deal. But weirder things have happened in commerce before. And so that's why, once again, I have been very careful with portfolio diversification, like I always say on this channel, because we never know what can happen. But now the question is, what exactly is Activision worth if this deal does not go through? Let's talk about that. And so you can see here, this is actually the model that the Patreons get access to at that lower tier. And of course, if you want to join us at that lower tier, it's only $5 a month, which is essentially just buying me a couple of coffees every month to get access to all of my research. And if you decide that you don't want access to the research anymore, take 30 days. And if you don't want it, I'll fully refund your first month subscription. I don't want you to pay for anything that you don't find value in. But notice here that I actually expect fiscal year 2022 to be very much of a struggling year for them. And, they've been reporting a challenge thus far this year. Activision and the Blizzard segments are down. The only segment that's up is King, and that's like their Candy Crush segment. And so I don't expect significant growth in 2023 and beyond. And so what does that mean overall? Well, the profit margins in, the gaming industry as a whole are pretty high. And so the company is still expected to be profitable despite the fact that it's struggling. And so to me, that suggests that Microsoft might actually be overpaying if they were just to buy the company, not integrate it and find synergies and that sort of stuff, which is what you and I as a shareholder would be under if we would to purchase Activision as a whole completely. And so how am I valuing it as a result? You can see here that I think the shares actually crash if the deal falls apart. And that's like the most duh comment that I've probably ever made on this channel. Now, notice I'm valuing the company at approximately $44 per share. And then I take into account their cash. Their excess cash includes the $3 billion breakup fee. I'll update this for the recent quarter. I don't think it's moved down materially. And so, their valuation is somewhere around 50 or $60 a share. So let's just call it $55 per share just to call it even until I can update for their recent quarter for the excess cash amount. I don't think it changed much. But the point that I'm trying to make is look at where the current share price is. This company is trading at approximately 135% of its intrinsic value. I think it goes at least to $55 per share, if not lower. And I just want to point out one of the issues that some of you might have. I just said that the shares might drop to around $50 per share or even lower if the deal gets canceled. Look at where the shares were trading before the acquisition was announced. It was around, call it anywhere between $60 per share and sort of like $65 per share. And so a lot of you might think that the shares might just go down to this range, so anywhere in the high 50s to mid 60s. The only thing that I would want to point out is that the company has deteriorated a little bit subsequent to this, and we're in a different environment right now. And so if you think that it's just going down to here, you're wrong. I believe, or, you might be right. I can't say that you're going to be wrong. Who am I to be able to predict the future? But I would just argue that, the tech space has taken a real hit, and, this acquisition not going through would probably put a really sour mouth in the shareholders who've owned it for all this time. And so I think the shares can go much lower. And so, sub $50 per share is kind of where I'm hanging my hat. We'll see what happens. Now, I want to know how many of you guys are actually sort of bullish on this deal and why, and how many of you guys are bearish on this deal and why. And if you're unfamiliar with this deal, I'm actually going to link a video where I talked more about the deal and all of the happenings that have happened since the deal got announced. And you can get to that video right here.